Hey guys, this is Dr. Samir Islam. I want to thank you today for joining me. And so this month begins what's called Celiac Awareness Month. And so what I want to talk about for these next couple of weeks, exactly what is celiac disease, some of the signs, the symptoms, and how we diagnose it. And I'm also going to go through some of the differences between what celiac disease is, maybe a term you may have heard called gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity, because there's a big difference between the two diseases. I want to make sure that you're clear on exactly what each of them are. So today, my first topic will be exactly what is celiac disease. And so today I'm going to focus on what exactly celiac disease is and what it is when you say that you have celiac and what that condition actually means. So when you have celiac, it's an actual autoimmune reaction against certain products in wheat called gluten. Now, what this does is that it causes a response within the GI tract, and that response is that you actually lose the villi of the small intestine. So your small intestine normally has these villi that are just like this, and these villi are used to absorb nutrients and food and vitamins and things such as that. When you ingest gluten, you have celiac disease, you actually shave off these villi, and so your small intestine looks like this. So it's almost like having blades of grass, and then that gluten just cuts off those blades, and so your small intestine is just like this. And because you lose those villi, you actually cannot absorb the things that you normally would absorb within the small intestine, including vitamins, minerals, food, and things like that. And so people who have celiac disease, they actually have an autoimmune reaction. There's something within their genes or within their genetics that causes them to lose this villi whenever they ingest gluten. So gluten comes in into the gut, and that ingestion of the gluten causes these villi to get sheared off, and so you lose the ability to absorb those particular nutrients, vitamins, and substances. And so it is actually a genetic problem within the gut of people who have celiac disease. Now, the consequence, like I mentioned before, is that you can't absorb food, and so people have symptoms of bloating, nausea, pain, diarrhea, weight loss, and things like that. I'll talk about that in more details next week. You also can't absorb certain vitamins that are typically absorbed within the small intestine, so things like iron. And so you may have iron deficiency anemia, vitamin D, and other things that are absorbed within the small intestine. And also you lose the ability to absorb certain nutrients as well, so people can have a lot of weight loss or not feel well or things like that. And so because you lose those villi, you don't actually have the capability to absorb the main items that you eat whenever you do have a meal. And what I like to tell people is that celiac disease is a real problem to have, and it's actually a pretty prevalent problem. Now, not everyone who's sensitive to gluten has celiac, and like I mentioned before, that's a completely different disease process, and I'll talk about that more in the next upcoming lectures. But celiac disease is a real legitimate condition in which people actually have an autoimmune reaction against certain foods or products that they eat, specifically wheat products. And this is very different from gluten sensitivity. And a lot of people get these two confused or mix up between the two. And this can cause a lot of confusion because when you have celiac disease, because it's a genetic problem, there are things that you have to watch out for, and there are things that your family members may have to watch out for as well. Whereas this is different from gluten sensitivity, which is not genetic, and you may not have to be as strict when you have gluten sensitivity. And once again, I'll talk about these topics in more detail later on. But in summary, celiac disease is basically an autoimmune condition. There are certain people who are more prone to developing celiac disease, and because of that, whenever they ingest gluten, you lose those villi of the small intestine. They get sheared off, and because they get sheared off, you can't absorb certain nutrients, causing loss of vitamins, nutrition, diarrhea, and things like that. So in the upcoming lectures, the next couple weeks, since it's Celiac Disease Awareness Month, we're going to talk about how we actually diagnose celiac disease and what are the symptoms. And I think you'd be surprised about how many symptoms from celiac are not related to the GI tract. There are a lot of conditions that don't present as just gut problems. We're going to talk about the treatment for celiac disease and some of the upcoming trials for other treatments that are there. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the differences between gluten intolerance and how it's very different from celiac disease. And so make sure you stay tuned for these talks. Like I mentioned before, I do these Facebook Live talks every Thursday. Oh, I'm sorry, every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. And we'll talk about these next couple topics in the upcoming lectures. And I encourage you to listen in so we can hopefully give you some information that you may find beneficial both for yourself or maybe for somebody that you know. I want to thank you for listening to my talk today. If you have any questions, I would encourage you to contact me either through Facebook or through this particular Facebook Live. I will put a link to my newsletter. If you enjoy this talk or enjoy other videos that I'm doing or other topics that I'm talking about, I would encourage you to join my newsletter. I send out a simple newsletter once a month about various different GI conditions, whether it's IBS, GERD, celiac, hemorrhoids, or anything else that may be in the news or important to you. And I would love to hear from you guys what you guys would like to listen or hear about or want to know about your conditions. So feel free to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, but also I'd encourage you to subscribe to my newsletter, which I'll put a link down below. Thanks, guys, and take care. Hope you guys have a great night.